as long as it's not already taken. I want to introduce Leah Rampey. Leah is going to be introducing Mary Anne Hitt. Leah is very active in environmental issues and has been over several decades. And she's offered numerous seminars on climate change. She teaches and leads retreats and pilgrimages and writes on the intersection of soul and ecology. She serves on the town council and a variety of committees here in Shepherdstown. Without further ado, Leah.
So good evening. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to introduce our speaker this evening, Mary Anne Hitt. She's the Senior Director of Climate Imperative. Some of you, like me, probably knew of Mary Anne before you had the chance to actually meet her. She's a hometown hero. And Fan have lived in Shepherdstown since 2008, and their daughter Hazel traces her West Virginia roots back 11 generations on her father's side. As one of the great things she's done, parenthetically, in my estimation, is to encourage her mother to move to Shepherdstown. That's that Marie is a fabulous neighbor. We know where from her daughter gets her deep commitment and love of Byrd. But of course, Mary Anne's impact goes far beyond this town. She has over 25 years of experience in building and leading effective campaigns and organizations. She was with Sierra Club for 12 years, where she served as National Director of Campaigns and also worked as a decade for Beyond Coal campaign, which many of you have no doubt heard of. That campaign is recognized as one of the most successful environmental campaigns in history. Working with partners across the nation, the campaign blocked the construction of 200 proposed U.S. coal plants, secured retirement of 2/3 of the existing U.S. coal plants, helped to usher in the clean energy era, and inspired the launch of sister Beyond Coal campaigns around the world. She was listed in 2015 by Politico in their top 50 thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics. She's made numerous media appearances on many different prominent shows. She co-hosts a podcast, No Place Like Home, that is a climate storytelling podcast. She was featured in 2 award-winning films, From the Ashes and Years of Living Dangerously. She's a contributor to 2 excellent books and is featured in another, All We Can Save is one of the early ones. I highly recommend that anthology of wonderful essays by women climate leaders. And if you came early, Kendra is in the front lobby, and those books are available for sale after the presentation tonight. In the most recently published anthology, Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility, I was intrigued to read Mary Anne's essay, which she writes from the perspective of the year 2030 and envisions what our lives will be like when we have made the changes necessary for a just and sustainable energy future. So here to discuss clean energy, coal, climate justice, and West Virginia's future, to remind us what is at stake and what is possible, let's welcome Mary Anne Hitt.
Stream that was on Zoom.
What a lovely introduction and what a lovely crowd. I am honored to be with you all. Leah, thank you so much. And it is true, she lives across the way from my mom, who is here, Marie Piney, who's we're trying to help with the population growth of West Virginia, however we can. We had a baby here. We brought my mom here. We're doing our part. And I just want to spend 20-30 minutes talking with you all about this moment when West Virginia has really found itself at the center of climate and clean energy policy and politics really around the world. And I want to just share a little bit of reflection on how we got to this moment and what's at stake right now, and then give you my sense of where we are headed. And again, thank you for having me. And thanks also to Kendra and Four Seasons for having the books out front that are available at the end of the presentation. I think that this is arguably the most pivotal time in the history of this state and in the history of this country for clean energy and the environment. And being in West Virginia, we are right in the middle of it. And so I am excited to share some reflections on this moment with you all, but I want to start with where I started here. So there's my mom and dad. And this is my daughter Hazel when I was giving the commencement address at the University of Tennessee, where I graduated a little while ago. But I grew up, my dad was the chief scientist in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My mom was a teacher and she gardener and always had us outside. And I grew up from a very young age, just feeling a calling to do something to help the world around me. When I was at the University of Tennessee, I started the first student environmental organization there, and then left and worked for a couple of different small nonprofit organizations that ultimately led me to one called Appalachian Voices, where I worked for 6 years as the executive director. Appalachian Voices was a regional environmental group, and one of the issues we were working on was mountaintop removal coal mining, which many of you will know, was a type of coal mining where they were blowing up entire mountains across West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, and Tennessee as a cheaper and more profitable way to get the coal out of the mountains. And so it was first starting to work on mountaintop removal that then led me to start thinking about coal and clean energy and why were we blowing up the mountains of Appalachia in the first place. And as Leah mentioned, their mountaintop removal over there, that is the image of what it looked like. And there was a proposal for one new coal-fired power plant. See how I do this without a microphone? Excuse me. So there was a proposal for one new coal-fired power plant in Southwest Virginia, and we were working away trying to stop mountaintop removal mining, and realized if one new coal plant got built in the coal fields of Southwest Virginia, it would be even harder to stop mountaintop removal. And mountaintop removal was not just devastating the environment, but it was also threatening the health of the communities that lived around these mines. And when I was at Appalachian Voices, we counted up actually 500 mountains that were blown up and flattened and wiped off the map by this type of mining. So we started working to try to stop this one new coal plant from being built, only to realize it was one of 200 coal plants that were proposed in the George W. Bush era all across the United States. And everywhere there was one of these new coal plants, there was someone who had found it in their backyard and wanted to work to try to stop it from being built. And so this one little campaign to stop this one new coal plant ended up connecting me with people from all over the country, and ultimately connecting me with the Sierra Club. And the Sierra Club was working to stop those with 300 other partner organizations. So it was really this huge network of grassroots groups that, as Leah mentioned, stopped these 200 new coal plants from being built, and then took everything we had learned and started looking at the existing 530 coal plants that were providing half of our electricity in this country a decade ago. And we, again, using that same grassroots strategy and all the things we learned about where decisions get made, about how we produce electricity in this country, over the course of about a decade, of those 530 coal plants that were up and running, now 372 of those are slated to retire. And there are 158 left. So 2/3 of the coal plants in the United States are retired or on track to retire. And people were doing that work because of the mining impacts, but also because the coal plants were our single biggest source in this country of mercury pollution, which causes brain damage in kids. Our single biggest source at that time of sulfur dioxide pollution, which is linked to heart attacks and strokes. It was our creating all this coal ash that was the second biggest volume of waste in this country after municipal garbage, and there were no federal standards for how it was disposed of. And it was our biggest source of greenhouse gases in the United States. Single biggest sources were these 530 coal plants. And we had a different way to make electricity, even a decade ago. And I'm going to talk a lot more about this, but we had other better, cleaner ways to make electricity. So over the course of the decade, I helped lead this campaign, and I'm now at this foundation called Climate Imperative, where I have now even more of a bird's eye view of the moment that we're in around climate and energy. And obviously this shift we've made away from coal has created challenges here in West Virginia for our economy. It's created challenges all over the country and lots of opportunities. And so I want to get into the good and the bad and all of that, but I mostly want us to look forward. Because again, this is the foundation that is laid, but we are really at this turning point here in this country. And I will just say, for the past 2 years, it is, as a climate advocate, it has felt like West Virginia was the center of the political universe. I was in Glasgow at the UN climate talks. I was in New York, San Francisco, and everybody wanted to talk about Joe Manchin, and everybody wanted to talk about West Virginia, and everybody wanted to know, what is it going to take to get Joe Manchin to allow something to go forward on climate? And you all will perhaps remember the moment last July when he said he was going to walk away from the, almost at that point, a couple of years of negotiations once and for all, and it looked like our chance to do anything on climate at the federal level was gone. And I happened to be in Portugal. I was at a convening of people from all over the world who are trying to accelerate and grow clean energy. And we were touring a coal plant. It was the biggest coal plant in Portugal that had been retired and decommissioned and was being replaced with clean energy because Europe is moving beyond coal. And I was literally with people from all over the world, from all over Europe and Asia and China and South America and the US, and the front page headlines came out: the climate bill is dead in the United States, Joe Manchin walks away. And it really, they were all looking at me. And it really felt like maybe on our watch that we had missed our chance. And we all know this is the decade that matters for our climate. This is the decade where we're either going to pull back from the cliff of setting some irreversible things in motion, or we're going to get on the path of clean energy. And so that was a moment I will never forget. And then later in August, obviously, Senator Manchin came back to the table. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed. And I remember I went and I had C-SPAN on, and I went and I got my daughter out of her room. And she was 12, so she did not want to come out of her room and watch C-SPAN. I wanted her to see this moment where West Virginia had played this instrumental role in getting a piece of federal climate legislation done that is not perfect. It's not everything that we want. It doesn't go far enough, but we had stared into the abyss. We saw what it would have looked like to have nothing, and we are running out of time. And so here we are in this moment where we now have, I would say that we haven't gotten to the finish line, but we have turned the page and we are writing a whole new chapter of our energy future in the United States and of our energy future here in West Virginia. And so I want to touch on three things about why this is so important for us right here in West Virginia. Is the impacts that we are going to experience from climate change here. It's the cost that we are all paying for continuing to rely on coal here, and the opportunities that are in front of us as we transition to clean energy. So the impacts, the costs we're currently paying, and the opportunities in front of us. And I think you may all, to speak about the impacts just for a moment. I think it's easy to think here in West Virginia that like we're actually going to be okay when it comes to climate change because we're not in the desert. You know, it's not going to become 140 degrees here. We're not living on the coastline, so we're not going to experience sea level rise. And I will confess that I sometimes think, "Whew, glad I live in West Virginia. Whatever happens, we're going to be all right." And we are in a good spot, but the one thing to note is the risk of floods actually here in West Virginia. And in the middle of all these machinations around the legislation when Joe Manchin was still on the fence, the New York Times ran a front page story that said, this is in 2021, as Manchin blocks climate plan, his state can't hold back floods. As the senator thwarts Democrats' major push to reduce warming, new data shows West Virginia is more exposed to worsening floods than anywhere else in the country. And this was a study by an entity called the Fifth Street Foundation, which does very granular flood risk mapping. And they found compared to any other state, we topped many lists of types of infrastructure at risk of increased floods. We have 61% of our power plants are in an area that's vulnerable to flooding. That's more than any other state in the country and twice the national average. And we also have the highest share of the following vulnerable to flooding. We have the highest share of vulnerable roads to flooding, the highest share of vulnerable fire stations, the highest share of vulnerable police stations, and we are tied with Louisiana for the greatest share of schools at risk of flooding and commercial properties at risk of flooding. And this is especially dire in regions that are downstream from strip mining, where the forests aren't there any longer to absorb these more intense rains, because as the climate warms, the atmosphere is holding more and more water. So when it does rain, the rain is a lot more intense. So we are going to feel those effects here in West Virginia. 61% of our power plants at risk, 46% of our roads, 57% of our fire stations, 50% of our police stations, 38% of our schools, 37% of our commercial properties at risk of increased flooding. So we do have a lot at stake here. We also are going to, secondly, pay a cost if we don't make this transition, and that's just an economic cost. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. American Electric Power and First Energy, our two big electric utilities, and the long and winding road that we have been on over the past few years as to hold on to coal power here in West Virginia. So nationally, we're getting 19% of our electricity from coal. When I started running the Beyond Coal campaign, we were getting half of our electricity from coal. It's now 19%. We're now getting more electricity from renewable energy than coal in the United States. But here in West Virginia, we are getting 89% of our electricity from coal. And we have these two big utilities, American Electric Power and First Energy. We are served by First Energy and their subsidiaries, Potomac Edison. So to take AEP first, they have these three coal plants, John Amos, Mountaineer, and Mitchell, that needed upgrades. And so AEP, Appalachian Power, went to the West Virginia Public Service Commission, the regulators, Virginia, and Kentucky, because all three states were co-owners of these power plants. And Virginia and Kentucky said, we do not want to pay to keep these power plants open. They needed upgrades for clean air and clean water standards. All these plants are 40, 50 years old. And they were facing about $450 million to keep them open. And the Virginia and the Kentucky regulators said, we are not going to have our ratepayers in these states pay So West Virginia said, we will pay for all of it. So West Virginia, through our Public Service Commission, has taken on the full cost of upgrading all 3 of these coal plants. And that AEP's own numbers showed that had those plants just been retired, it would have saved ratepayers, us customers, $300 million. So that's just the savings from retiring them. And there's a report out there called the Coal Crossover Report, if you want to see that, that finds that every single coal plant in the country at this point is more expensive to keep running it than building new renewable energy. So coal is just more expensive than renewable energy. The economics have really shifted. So that was the AEP story. And I'll tell you this, Sean O'Leary, who is a senior researcher at the clean energy think tank, Ohio River Valley Institute, said about this AEP scenario, these plants, even if they're kept open, are going to be operating at such a low level, there will be far fewer jobs and far less coal consumed than now. It's as if everyone walks around utterly oblivious to that fact, and it has huge economic implications. If anything, there is a concerted effort to prevent that kind of reimagining of West Virginia as a different kind of energy state. So closer to home, here, our utility, Potomac Edison, may also be on the hook for some uneconomic coal plants. This has been in the news just in the past few weeks. There's a coal plant called the Pleasance Power Station near Parkersburg, and it was originally announced for retirement in 2018. And the legislature and the Public Service Commission keeps intervening to give it one lease on life after another. And most recently, First Energy, they sold the plant to this company for the sole purpose of retiring it. And it is supposed to stop operating at the end of this month. And last week, the Public Service Commission came and they basically ordered Mon Power and Potomac Edison, the 2 First Energy subsidiaries, to do a study about what it would take to keep the plant running over the next year. And during the course of that year, to pay to keep the plant operational, even though it's not going to make any electricity. So it will pay for the workers to stay there and keep the plant operational. It will not produce any electricity. And the original estimates is that was going to cost about $36 million for the year just to keep the plant open, but not making any electricity. So we will all be paying for the next year for this coal plant that will not be making any electricity. And then early estimates were it could cost up to $500 million to get it to where it needs to be to, be providing electricity for us. So First Energy did not want to do this. The industrial electricity customers did not want to do this. The advocates for us as consumers did not want to do this, but our state utility commission has deep ties to the coal industry and to the oil and gas industry, and so has directed this to happen. And Evan Hansen, who's the state legislator from Morgantown, who's wonderful, said, quote, electric bills for West Virginia customers have gone up faster than in any other state in the country because our regulators have doubled down on coal when they should have been diversifying our fuel mix. Forcing ratepayers to pay even more to keep an unprofitable plant open will only add to this burden. If the Pleasance plant could compete in the free market, they wouldn't be shutting it down. So that is the price that we are all paying for just continuing to hold on to these coal-fired power plants, and coal is our sole basically source of energy in West Virginia. On the flip side, there are huge opportunities being created in this state around clean energy. And so that's my last point I want to share with you all. I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. Since it was passed last August, it has already brought big new companies to the state that are creating almost 5,000 new jobs in West Virginia, from advanced battery manufacturing, an electric school bus factory that's located in Charleston. So 4,755 new jobs. That's roughly equivalent to the jobs in the state from natural gas extraction. And that's from this handful of clean energy companies coming to the state. They're going to invest more than $782 million in West Virginia. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. And I have just a quick slide here on some of the things. This is a picture of me and Senator Ed Markey and a couple colleagues at the White House when the Inflation Reduction Act was signed. And just to give you a snapshot of some of the provisions, it extends clean energy tax credits for 3 years. It provides credits for transitioning coal plant sites to renewables, for transitioning rural electric co-ops to renewables. It has some incentives for electric vehicles. For buildings, it gives you rebates for putting electric appliances in your house, and it provides incentives for efficiency. There's a lot of provisions on environmental justice and supporting a just transition for coal workers. So if you pay a prevailing wage, if you use made in America components, there are added incentives for your clean energy projects. And then there's some really big grant and loan programs that are part of this that are, again, really specifically designed for coal communities, energy communities, communities that have been overburdened by pollution for a long time. And coal states and energy states get the biggest benefits out of the Inflation Reduction Act. I talked to my friend Dan Conant, who runs Solar Hauler, which is a company. Many of you have gone solar with Solar Hauler in the Panhandle. I know. Full disclosure, I am on their board. And he mentioned that he said Solar Hauler has doubled their workforce basically just in the past year. That solar is just cheaper than the power you get from AEP or First Energy all across West Virginia. He said we currently have 14,000 electricians in West Virginia, and in the next decade we're going to need 7,000 more to meet all of the demand for solar and wind and electrifying your homes and buildings and putting in new heat pumps and putting in new electric appliances. So you've got all of these great incentives for here in West Virginia, already creating thousands of new jobs and the potential to create thousands more. And so just to wrap up here, where we go from here, I think there's just 3 things that are important, kind of on the policy side. One is we need to make sure that as many of these incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act get where they need to be, to the people on the ground, to the communities that need them the most. And there are great organizations like Coalfield Development Corporation, started by Brandon Dennison, another product of Shepherd University and at Shepherdtown. Solar Hauler, West Virginia Community Development Hub. There are great groups that are poised to really seize this moment for our state. We also have to make sure that utilities are actually taking advantage of all these provisions that they can use to retire their coal plants and replace them with clean energy. The ones that I've been talking about this evening, they need to hear from us. And our regulators and our elected officials need to hear from us, including this Public Service Commission. And Lucia Valentine is here. And Lucia, that's all good, Lucia. Lucia did the Herculean and heroic work of lobbying in the state legislature this last session on, and thank you, John Doyle, for your service. Already in the legislature. Trying to get the changes in how our Public Service Commission is making these decisions, trying to get our elected officials here in the state, if nothing else, to start thinking about the costs, thinking about the economic costs that we are all paying for refusing to think more broadly about clean energy. So we need to do what we can to get these Inflation Reduction Act resources into our communities. Our utilities need to hear from us, and Lucia is with West Virginia Environmental Council. They can help get you connected to your decision makers. Lots of other organizations around here can do that as well. There's a coalition called West Virginians for Energy Freedom that is specifically running a campaign around these utility practices that are not allowing us to have clean energy. So getting your voices heard to your regulators and getting your voices heard to elected officials and utilities. Those are all important things we can do in this moment. And I will just close with one of my favorite sign from any protest I ever went to was this one from a People's Climate March. And if you can't quite see that, her sign says, I used to say someone should do something about that. And then I realized I'm someone. And I think that's what I would leave you with that, is that if there's any piece of this gets your dander up or gets you feeling passionate or gets you feeling motivated and you think somebody should do something about that, maybe that person is you. And again, there are many great organizations that can get you plugged in. But when this book came out and Rebecca Solnit, who is one of my heroes, invited me to contribute an essay to this book. And she told me the title. I just thought those three words sum up what I've been trying to say my entire career. It is not too late. It is not too late for our climate. It's not too late for my daughter Hazel, who could bring a 12th generation West Virginian into the state to build a brighter future for herself. This decade is the pivotal decade for our climate, for making this energy transition. And we have what we need. We have the technologies, we have public will on our side. We increasingly have political will, although it's on a thin margin, or we wouldn't have been able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. And so what a time to be alive. Like, what an honor and a privilege to be alive right now and have the chance to try to tip things continually in a better direction. Because by the time Hazel is my age, a lot of things will be set in stone. It will be very hard for her generation to unravel the situation if the ice caps melt. There's not some big refrigerator in the sky that will freeze them back up. So this is it. This is the time. And it's not too late. And where we are right here matters so much. This state is small, but we play a very big role in our country's energy future and in the future of our climate. And we know here in Shepherdstown how much our individual voices matter. I know a lot of folks here in the room, I'll just close with this little anecdote, tried to stop the Rockwool factory from coming here, which we failed to do. I was one of them. But you may have seen just in the last week that there was a potential rezoning for industrial use of a spot near the Rockwool facility. And someone caught it in the classified ads. And they went to the county commission meeting or the Ranson city council meeting and said, wait a minute, what are you doing here? And they, for now, pulled back this rezoning proposal because they realized they hadn't put an adequate notice in the paper. That the paper that they had put was this vague little notice that wasn't giving people adequate notice. And that was the civic muscle that we all built from the Rockwool experience. People are paying attention. People are reading the fine print of the classified ads. People are not letting things slip by this community anymore. And it's just wherever you are, whatever piece of this speaks to you, it's the using that civic muscle that you have, paying attention, joining up with others who care. I saw it in the Beyond Coal campaign, where we did something that no one thought was possible. We managed to get this country on a track for moving beyond coal. I saw it in the push to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which seemed many times like it wasn't going to happen, that your voice matters, that David can beat Goliath, that we can do incredible things. And I want my daughter to be able to raise a 12th generation of West Virginians here if she chooses to. I want all of our kids to have a planet and a future where they can thrive and where they can make their dreams come true. And this is the moment to lean into all that together. So thank you.
I've been concerned, we're about to embark on the comprehensive plan for Jefferson County. And I've been concerned about the amount of opposition there is to solar farms in the county. I can think of some ways to ameliorate it, but you probably have some even better ones.
Well, let me say, my husband could not be here this evening, but he asked me to talk about the comprehensive plan. So thank you. So Than, wherever you are, we're talking about the comprehensive plan. So it does set the tone for the next chapter of development in our county. He's working with Potomac Valley Audubon as a volunteer to just have one avenue of community input into that process. And it's definitely important to pay attention to. And I'm sure there are probably divided opinions in this room about large scale solar in Jefferson County. I would venture to guess. My perspective is that we have got to build a lot of renewable energy in this country to displace the fossil fuels that we're now using. Every form of energy has an impact. If we want to enjoy our modern quality of life, every form of energy has an impact. We are going to have to build a lot more wind and solar. That doesn't mean we have to build it all everywhere. We don't have to build it in the habitat of sensitive wildlife species. We don't have to build it in, our wilderness areas. But we are going to have to build more of it, and we're going to have to grapple with this in our communities. And there are ways that can be cited that have less of an impact on our experience of our communities and on the natural world. But we gotta, this is gonna be something we're gonna be grappling with. Any other questions?
For the average homeowner to get solar, take advantage of the tax credit. If you just have a simple little outline of, you get a new roof, get solar panels, you get some fancy heat pump or something.
Yeah, so I am on the board of Solar Hauler. There's Mountain View Solar is another great company that's in this area. There are a few good solar companies, but basically you stay on the electric grid. So your experience in your house does not change. My husband and I were actually the first people to go solar at Shepherdstown when we lived on Washington Street. And so you stay connected to the electric grid. You don't need a new roof unless you need a new roof. But if your current roof is fine, then you just put it up there. And now most of these solar companies, you can either buy the whole system. So you just put the money out front, and then your electric bill goes down significantly because you have your own little power plant on the roof. Or the companies will get into a financing agreement with you where you're paying them a certain amount every month. But as Dan Conant told me that basically he gave me a number, and I will say it back to you just so I don't get it wrong, which is Solar Hauler can lower the energy prices that you're paying in this area by 15%. And again, that's just because our electricity prices are going up faster than almost anywhere else because we have so much coal. And AEP, he told me AEP just requested another rate increase. We're not in AEP's territory of 37% next year, or 12% a year over 2 years, or I'm sorry, over 3 years, 12% a year over 3 years, or 37% all at once. And that's for coal and natural gas that they've already burned. That was just a lot more expensive than they expected. So again, solar on your rooftop can lower your prices, and Mountain View Solar, Solar Hauler, you call the companies and just make sure it's a good, reliable one, because there are some fly-by-night ones too. But I can definitely vouch for both of those, and they, they'll tell you your financial options.
Well, I know that, but can you just give the audience, would somebody get a grant or feedback, 5,000?
The tax incentives are, if you owe taxes, then it's a tax deduction for you. One new thing the Inflation Reduction Act did is that if you don't owe taxes, if you can't take advantage of a tax deduction, the solar company can now basically sell that credit to somebody else. And so because of the Inflation Reduction Act, there's some new options for how they can help you take advantage of that tax credit. Here and here and here.
Feels like one of the paradoxes in West Virginia is that we want to electrify electric cars, electric ranges, all that, and it's fabulous on lead. But the more we electrify, the more coal we're burning, because so much of our power is coming from coal. So how do you think about that paradox?
Well, I think we've got to do both because we're running out of time for our climate. It is not too late, but we are running out of time.
It's dark.
Pardon me?
It's getting dark.
It's getting dark.
Yes.
Thank you. And so I think the days are numbered for West Virginia to be able to just be have our electricity be so coal heavy, because businesses that want to come here are demanding clean energy. And not because it's cheaper, but because they have their own corporate climate commitments. And so I know that there, all of these companies that came into the state, I know we're asking AEP and First Energy, can you guarantee you'll be able to give me clean energy at some point? Because I need that for my stakeholders. And so we keep pushing the Public Service Commission, keep pushing the utilities and electrify. I mean, I have seen no matter where you are, an electric car is still less of a climate impact than an internal combustion engine car, even here, just because it's, it's just much more efficient, et cetera. So I think we have to push hard on both fronts at the same time. And there was a time when we could have sequenced it. First, we clean up the power and then we electrify everything. And we sort of had time to do it in that kind of a sequence, but we didn't use that time well. So now we have to do it all simultaneously. Okay, so I see two here and then I'll go over here and then over here.
Okay, it's along the same lines. I'd see if I'm thinking right, Mary Anne, from what I've read. Right now, in this time, to use solar, right, like 660 acres outside of Charlestown that's being developed with the solar panels. But then to me, it's not permanent. It has to be done. Like you said, we've kind of wasted all this time. We've got to do this big deal thing. And so I'm thinking that in the future, those things could be looked at. I won't be here, but other people will look at it. Hazel will look at it and change it as it moves. But we don't have time to do something.
Yeah, and we are on a big electric grid here. Our electric grid is called PJM. So, it's going to be a mix of solutions over time. And, we don't, just because a coal plant is in West Virginia doesn't mean it's providing all of its electricity to West Virginia. So this is a big system with lots of inputs and lots of complexity. And there are some new technologies like offshore wind that is just has huge growth and huge potential for the whole Eastern United States that are it's just starting to take off, and energy storage. So there's a lot of things that are changing really quickly in real time.
Does West Virginia have a particular role in energy storage, or to put it more generally, where does the electricity come from when the wind doesn't blow it, the sun
Yes.
doesn't shine?
So one of the new businesses that has come here is called Form Energy, and they're building their first ever factory in Weirton at the site of an old steel mill. And it is this new kind of technology that literally, it's called iron ore battery. And they take basically iron and they use the rusting process, just oxidizing, and that creates energy that can be stored. So now if anyone is an engineer here, you're gonna have to let me hand my baton to you, because that's the extent of my understanding of it. You can all go Google it, but it's called Form Energy. And it is using this very simple rusting of iron to create a situation where they can store a huge amount of energy. So that's just one example. I mean, California has a pretty big energy storage mandate, and there's lots of different technologies that they're using to balance out all the wind and solar that they are making. So solar with storage today in most parts of this country is cheaper than running an existing coal plant. So storage technology has come a long way, and there's still, West Virginia is one of the places where the companies are moving who are at the cutting edge of developing that technology further. I saw a couple over here, and then I'll come over there.
The Public Service Commission in West Virginia is appointed by the governor.
That's correct. The Public Service Commission is appointed by the governor.
You've dealt with or know about, Public Service Commission members sometimes are elected.
Yes,
I know-
Georgia, for example, is elected.
By the University of Tennessee.
We can't hear it.
Okay, I'll repeat the question back. Go ahead.
I'm saying, Public Service Commission members in West Virginia are appointed,
Yes.
and other states, they're not, they're elected.
Yeah.
So it's any chance, because if the governor is appointing every
Mhm.
Public Service Commission member, that means a lot of politics.
Well, we are going to have a new governor next year, because our governor is termed out and is on to his new adventure.
Yeah, but that's like.
Well, I think, I genuinely,
But I know Virginia, the legislature appoints.
yes, some states, the legislature appoints the utility commissioner. Some states, they're elected in a pub, like, you go out and you vote for them on your ballot. Here, the governor appoints them. I mean, we're here, and if we want to change this is one of the things we're gonna have to change. Is we're gonna have to.
More progressive, elected members or.
I don't think it's necessarily elected PSCs are therefore more progressive. I think it really depends. I mean, Georgia has an elected utility commission and there have been, Southern company and Georgia companies, hand in glove and build a giant bajillion-dollar nuclear plant that I think they're now regretting that they own. So anyway, I don't know that electing is progressive or less progressive, but I think here in West Virginia where we are gonna have to get the governor to start appointing better commissioners, and the cost of electricity going up and up and up into infinity is an argument that I think maybe our next governor will listen to, especially if they want to keep bringing businesses to this state. So one more and then I'll come over here.
Just following, sitting here, I checked on the current carbon dioxide level. It's 420 parts per minute. 2 years ago it was 400, so it is going up and
Yep.
nobody's denying it. There's a problem. However, your alternative power is solar and wind. Solar doesn't work when the sun doesn't shine. Wind doesn't work when the wind doesn't blow. What are you proposing for a base level of electricity and energy? Would you be in favor of nuclear power in West Virginia, which was approved last year by the legislature? I used to run very large manufacturing operations that required constant, instantaneous 24 hours a day electricity. And that's not going to be, you can't supply that with wind and solar.
Yes, so I will briefly speak to that, and I'm also happy to talk to you after. And I think the brief answer is this isn't going to happen overnight. This is an evolution over time. So we have states like California right now, which is probably farthest along in the percentage of its electricity coming from clean energy and with storage. And they have some ability to balance the grid because the sun is mostly available in the day, the wind is mostly available at night, and they've got a lot of energy storage, and they have some nuclear, and they have some gas plants. So this isn't a thing that's going to switch overnight, but I think the real task in front of us is to get as much renewable energy and storage. I mean, most of the rest of the country is very, very far behind. And so we have a long way to go before that starts to become a problem. We do have a base of existing nuclear plants that's probably going to run for a long time. I think whether or not the economics of new ones will make sense, whether people want to live next to new nuclear plants is, I think, is an open question. But I think that the task in front of us is we're very far behind in the scale up of clean. And as we have very smart, responsible grid operators who are not going to allow the lights to go out as we make this transition. So, and I'm happy to follow with you more after. I want to maybe take a couple more from here and then I do want to let people go. So, or did I see a hand? Maybe I didn't see a hand over here. Okay, one last question, or are we good? Okay.
Okay, so most people understand money more than science. How much have these decisions made by our Republican leaders in the state of West Virginia cost the average family? And why don't we apply a number to that?
Yeah.
So they can be known for that at the ballot box.
That's a good idea. I do have this is not the kind of number you were looking for, but one number that I do have here is that
It was 37% increase. It's huge.
Yes, it is.
in the last 15 years, for the AEP service territory, bills have gone up 90% in the last 15 years. So that's just that's that kind of a number. You're right. I think that's a great thing to all of us to go do some research, and our poet laureate Stuart Acuff will take that number and get it far and wide for all to hear and all to see. Well, y'all, Shepherdstown is so special. I think I meant to say this at the beginning and I forgot, but Shepherdstown is so special to me and to my family, including my mom, and being part of a community that cares so much about the future of the state, the future of our world, and that cares where people care so much about one another, is just it's a dream come true. And I'm honored that you're here, and I appreciate all your time and your interest. Thank you. And I